My name is Hope Davis, and I will be talking about the power of weakness. We all have things that we struggle with. Now, I don't mean the common college struggles like time management, homework loads, or getting out of bed in the morning. I mean the personal struggles, like pride, selfishness, and self-pity. These are weaknesses that we prefer not to think about. They are like little thorns stuck in our mind that remind us of the areas of our lives where we are imperfect and the places where we fall short. They reveal the ugliness inside of us. We try to avoid them, and when they poke us at the most inconvenient times, we try to drown them out with other things. And we especially don't like to share them with others, because to us, they are the thorns that make us feel inadequate, and they remind us of how far we have fallen. We try so hard to hide the ugliness and insecurities that live inside of us, but the hard truth is, we aren't enough. Whatever we do, someone else can do it better. No matter how kind we strive to be, there will still be days when we lash out in anger. No matter how hard-working we try to be, there will still be days where we majorly procrastinate and turn in assignments that are less than great. And we can never meet everyone's expectations. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. We are overflowing with sinfulness and we have fallen so short, and yet we build up all these impossible expectations for ourselves and others to meet. It's as if we are trying to make everyone else fill up that cavity that we can't figure out how to fill ourselves. But this is the problem. We don't have the ability or power to fill it ourselves. We weren't created for that. In 2 Corinthians 12:7, the Apostle Paul describes his own thorn. He says, "Therefore, so that I would not become arrogant, a thorn in the flesh was given to me, a messenger of Satan to trouble me, so that I would not become arrogant." As with any thorn, when we see one, we want to get rid of it right away because it causes pain and discomfort. And Paul has the same reaction. He says, "I asked the Lord 3 times about this, that it would depart from me." Paul recognizes the possible reason for this thorn. He even says it twice, so that I would not become arrogant. But he still asks God to remove it. Instead of granting his request, God's answer reveals an unusual perspective of weakness. Paul says, "But he said to me, 'My grace is enough for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness.'" It's not that God needs us in order to have full power. God does not depend on us for anything because he's God. Rather, we feel God's love and grace the strongest during our moments of weakness. Isn't it true that during our trials, we become especially thankful for our friends? We are always thankful for them, but that thankfulness is reinforced when they show their support and love during those difficult days. And it's the same way with God. During hard times, our thankfulness and love for him is reinforced because he often reveals his greatness and love in surprising, powerful ways. We might be going through something major, like watching a family member struggle with health issues, or it could be seemingly insignificant, like needing a boost of energy to get through an assignment. But God cares about all of it. And we learn the most and have the most powerful experiences with him when we realize the extent of his grace during our times of weakness. When life seems to be going well, we tend to shift our reliance from God to ourselves. In the hard times, on the other hand, those days when it feels like we are being weighed down by everyone and everything, we are brought back to our reliance on God. Our weaknesses help us acknowledge our true sinful state, and they lead us back to God's arms. And we are reminded that we cannot carry everything on our own, nor should we. And yet, we continually forget this and keep trying anyway, and the cycle begins all over again. But God still meets us with just as much grace as before. There are 2 kinds of people that reject God's grace: those who think they are too good for it, and those who feel they are not good enough to accept it. But both of these views are a form of stubbornness and sin because they are both ways of saying that his grace is not enough. But God's grace is overflowing, and he freely gives it to us in full every day. All we have to do is accept it. We've heard God's answer to Paul. Now let's look at Paul's response. He says, "So then, I will boast most gladly about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may reside in me." Now, this does not mean that we all start going around and shouting all the things we think we are bad at. But I think Paul phrases it this way to show us the proper response to God's words. This shows how seriously he takes it. It's as if he is saying, okay, God, I want to witness and experience your power by relying on you, so to keep me from becoming arrogant. So if I'm going to boast about anything, it will be my weaknesses. So now listen to the attitude that Paul describes toward weaknesses. He says, so then I will boast most gladly. If someone comes to you and shares an area in their life that they need to work on, how do they communicate with you? They usually talk in quieter tones or they whisper. And they don't want you to spread it around either, for fear of people viewing them differently. Why do they act this way? Because of their view of weakness. The world rewards those that have the do-it-yourself attitude, and they value independence. God, on the other hand, values you. It doesn't matter where you are at in life or what you think you've done wrong. Our weaknesses don't affect God's love for us, and this is something that we need to be reminded of constantly. Our weaknesses don't affect God's love for us. When we freely surrender and lift up our ugly parts to him, he often surprises us by turning what we thought ugly and useless into priceless treasure. Because that's what we are to him. We are his treasure. Viewing weakness from this perspective should make us want to boast gladly and keep giving God every part of us, including the ugly. And Paul affirms this in the next verse. He says, therefore I am content with weaknesses, with insults, with troubles, with persecutions and difficulties for the sake of Christ. He lists a lot of the things that make us feel weak, and these are all things that he has experienced himself. Paul was shipwrecked, persecuted, and even stoned. And he knew the hardships were far from over when he was writing this letter to the Corinthians. He knew these things would continue to happen to him, but he recognizes that they can all be used to bring God glory. When we accept his grace and find our strength and confidence in God, the pressures of the world no longer have any weight against us, because this grace, this strength and confidence cannot be taken away. Which is why Paul ends the verse in such a powerful way. He says, therefore I am content with weaknesses, with insults, with troubles, with persecutions, and difficulties for the sake of Christ. For whenever I am weak, then I am strong. We are nowhere near enough on our own, but God's grace is more than enough for us. Our weaknesses bring us back to God and remind us that he is all we need. Our confidence comes from him. Our strength comes from him. The reasons for the things we do should not be to make us feel capable or to try to prove our worth, because we are already worthy in God's eyes because of what Christ has done for us. Instead, we should do things as acts of surrender and praise to him, because God and only God deserves the glory. It's not about what we do, it's about who we are doing it for. Humbly accepting the grace he has for us each day will help us avoid relying only on ourselves so that we don't keep repeating that vicious cycle. And as Paul says, it will also keep us from becoming arrogant. It will also help protect us from the urge to set impossible expectations for ourselves and others. God's grace allows us to find freedom and relief in the fact that we are not enough, because when we are weak, then we are strong.